Right, back again for part three, looking at a comparison between Blake's London and Seamus Heaney's Storm on the Island. We're getting down here to read the last. I hope I'm not going to go on for too much longer, but one of the things that we can look at in terms of alternative interpretations is that for Heaney, the poem can be certainly read in a number of ways. Two main ways, I think. He talks about the power of nature, and you can read it like that, certainly. But I think there's also clearly another layer of meaning when he uses the storm as an extended metaphor to explore how constant the political conflict affects the mentality of people in Northern Ireland. Some people suggested that there is a tone of confidence at the beginning, a tone of optimism that fades more towards the end. I slightly disagree with that. I think that an alternative reading to that is that I think in the end of the poem, I think he suggested there's a way out. There's quite a simple way out for people who live there. When in the last line he says, let's look at the last two or three lines. He says, "Space is a salvo. We are bombarded by the empty air. Strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear." So the word space, empty, and the phrase "huge nothing" suggests that the power that is prevalent in and affects people in his community is perhaps something that is a mental construct, and with a change of attitude, that power would fade. Pretty much in the same way that the impact of the storm may fade after it's gone. Why do I think that? Well, I think there's certain elements in the first part of the poem, and this is really worked out in the personification, which I'll move to here. The personification of the land when he says, "This wizened land has never troubled us with hay, so as you see, there are no stacks or stooks that can be lost." There is nothing that the storm can take away from them. The land gives up nothing. And in a way, I think it can also be read that perhaps his community, the Catholic community, whilst they're under a great deal of pressure and they're bombarded, they're not going to give anything away. Okay, so I think in terms of Heaney, the poem can be read in a number of different ways. In Blake, I think perhaps that's more difficult to get some different ways of reading the poem because, as I said at the beginning in the first video, I think he's pretty angry most of the way through, and I think it's fairly clear what his feelings are towards the society. I think the one link, though, is that the one thing that we can see as a comparison is if we look here where he says the mind-forged manacles. Blake was somebody who very clearly believed that people's attitudes were developed and they were indoctrinated by institutions such as this church and this state, and the royalty and the upper classes, the mind-forged manacles, the self-created imprisonment, the self-created restraints that people developed. And so he's perhaps implying there and inviting us to look and think, if we change our attitudes, then maybe some of these things like the chimney sweeper's cry and the infant's cry of fear could also be changed. So I think there is a link there. I think one of the other things that I would put down here, so I'm going to change color of this square because I think it's something that's very applicable to both poems, is that both poets provide a personal perspective of their environment, and through this description add a layer of meaning that encourages the reader, us, to look at and below the surface and what is around them, what they might ignore every day. I think what they're trying to do is to rather than get the reader to turn away and fear what is powerful, they're getting us to turn and to look at it, and by turning, look at it, change our relationship to it. If we look at power more closely, perhaps it is a mind-forged manacle. Maybe it's a huge nothing that we fear, in Heaney's words. Okay, so I hope actually going through that process has provided you with another way of revision. certainly I think both poems could be read in certain ways, and I've just pulled out some of the things that for me are worthy of comparison. I think this question here, what do we learn by comparing these poems, is sort of summed up in this last box. The power is present in society at any time, and it's up to us to look at it in certain ways. I think from my point of view, when you look at these two poems together, I certainly think that the connections that they make are very interesting. And one of the things that I've learnt about both poets is that by observing the everyday, by looking very carefully at the everyday things around them, you can actually see how power influences your life. And I think that's the one thing that I've learned by comparing the poems. There could well be others. And I think in the process of comparing, you're looking at similarities and differences, but you're also trying to develop perhaps a new meaning for both poems by looking at them. I'm going to pull this down because I think it's relevant to it. I think he talks about the uncontrollable power of nature. I think that the power is, I think you might have also looked up here in terms of poetic device. We might have also talked about the estuary enjambrement in both poems. So in fact, what I'm going to do is just colour it again. So it's sort of something that is linked to both poems. I'll keep it there because there you go. I could also talk about the possessive pronoun we. I haven't gone into that too much. Both poems are written in the present tense, which perhaps makes it more immediate. And I think that links to the idea of the poems, both poems being in the form of a dramatic monologue. Could have developed that point more, perhaps. I mean, I've referred to the idea of the half rhymes, so we can pull these here. As you go through, you can sort of tidy this up and sort of create more of a form. If you look at these mind map apps, they have a lot of different, they have many different types of features. You can join them together. You can add more text. You can add a different branch. You can add more text. If you play around them a little bit, it's good. Don't play around them too much because the most important thing is you go back and you read your text, your poems and your novels and your plays and get a good understanding of them for yourself. But anyway, I hope that what you've done, what I've shown you there over the course of 3 videos can be helpful to you. And if you like what you see, give me a thumbs up. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.